Let's just keep that one between us, because pretty much every other country has been caught up in the crossfire with zero protection. Given that for decades the US has been controlling global markets to its continued policy of hegemony, you'd think someone would have predicted it could also bring them crashing down. Oh wait, someone did. And while the headlines right now are blaming Trump for the global calamity, more than 2,500 new companies exporting Russian goods have been registered. Trade between Moscow and Beijing reached peak fever last year at around $250 billion.
The globalization of the world economy has been destroyed, not by Donald Trump, but by Joe Biden, when he imposed sanctions and made them his sole foreign policy instrument. The fragmentation of the global economy began long before today. Of course, this process was accelerated by Joe Biden's use of the dollar as a weapon to punish the innocent. Service in dollars was stopped, barriers were imposed. As they were being bypassed, workarounds were being closed down. When there were trends towards the ability of this means of payment and laid a time bomb, which is sure to explode sometime.
Russia was long moving in the direction of self-sufficiency, and those sanctions imposed over the last decade have only helped strengthen that journey. And the West, who threatened Russia with isolation and economic blockades, is now at a crossroads to make a deal and appease Trump or follow Moscow's example. How the tables have turned.
Earlier, we spoke with two U.S. economists who laid out how Western states are scrambling to contend with the new financial picture.
I think Europe realizes that the big subsidy from the United States, whether it's through NATO or through the trade relation, is going to go away eventually under Trump. Europe is the odd man out now. And I think economically, Europe is going to be in a great difficulty here over time. And, what are they going to do? What's going to be their strategy? Well, you look at European leadership, they're not too bright in terms of geopolitics or whatever. And they've hitched their wagon to this losing war in Ukraine that's going to cost them a lot of money. I don't see much future for Europe in terms of the economy or politically. They're becoming a political backwater now, pretty much. They're not
It was always a smart thing to be self-sufficient as much as you could. That's not a new idea. That's a very old idea. In the enthusiasm for globalization, nations, particularly the Europeans, but others too, forgot all of that. But if you think that moving to nationalism is something good for the mass of working people, then you don't understand how this system works. They can go backwards for a while, but they will not go backwards as long as the globalization went forward. And it will also be many years of difficulty in every other part of the world. Big adjustments to an autarkic regime, which will very quickly move populations to question that kind of a move.
Donald Trump's trade war seems to be forcing the EU to think soberly about its economic future. That's after the bloc's energy executives said that buying cheap Russian gas might not be such a bad idea after all. The stance comes 3 years after Europe itself restricted imports from the world's biggest country and opted for more expensive American LNG instead. Here's RT contributor Rachel Marston.
Well, it looks like some folks in Europe are starting to get a case of the breakup blues. Turns out that the Western media is catching wind of energy execs and industry heads openly reminiscing about their old gas flame Russia, the one that the EU cut off in 2022 when things got spicy in Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President and de facto Queen of Europe, played the wicked stepmother in this scenario, banning the pipeline prince, with Biden giving a thumbs up from across the Atlantic. Yeah, of course he did, since the U.S. got to slide in there with the very conveniently timed, hey there, looks like you could use some gas, and then start shipping a pricier liquefied version of this stuff over to Europe. Now, pre-2022, Russian gas made up about 40 to 45% of the EU's gas imports. U.S. LNG, just 6% at the time. But now Russia's down to about 15%, while America has climbed to about 20%. And Trump wants that number even higher, or else tariffs. So France's Engie is now floating the idea of getting back to 20 to 25% Russian gas. And another French company, another giant, Total Energy, its CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, is openly side-eyeing what he qualifies as U.S. gas overdependence and calling for supply diversification. But it turns out, well, it's a challenge when it comes to renewables replacing that supply, because wind and solar still haven't gotten their act together. Who knows if they ever will. Norway, which is a supplier that's upped their exports to the EU by about 10%, seems to be tapping out. Qatar is a minor supplier. It hasn't upped its exports. And another minor supplier, Algeria, well, it's currently starring in what seems like a never-ending political telenovela with France. So who knows if they'll be up for the task or even interested. At least France did keep its nuclear energy options, unlike Germany, which ghosted nuclear, flirted with wind, and then went running back to coal. And how's that working out for Berlin? Well, just ask the folks at Germany's major industrial parks.
We're in a severe crisis and can't wait. Reopening pipelines would reduce prices more than any current subsidy programs.
We need Russian gas. We need cheap energy, no matter where it comes from. We need Nord Stream 2, because we have to keep energy costs in check.
Well, looks like you're out of luck, guys, if the EU has anything to do with it, because the Brussels bureaucracy just happens to be prepping its next big reveal, a May rollout of a plan to depend even less on Russian fuel and somehow also have even lower prices.
There will still be a need for gas, and here we will have to find alternative sources other than Russia. And this can also mean more imports from the U.S.
Yeah, that sounds kind of like a vibes-based strategy, heavy on virtue, light on things like facts and math. Minor detail, right? Maybe the plan is ultimately just to do more of the same. That is, skirt their own self-imposed rules by buying gas from third parties who totally aren't just reselling Russian supply. Guess we'll see when they unveil this big plan on May 6th, unless, of course, they delay that unveiling yet again. Yes, writer's block is tough to overcome when your plot makes no sense. Meanwhile, EU member states are just busy dealing with reality.
With ideology, with press statement, you cannot heat the houses. You cannot run economy. In order to have heating in the houses and flats of the people, in order to have gas to run industry on, you need a gas source. This is the reality. It's a nice dream to have gas from somewhere, from where you don't have a pipeline. That is not more than naive illusion. Whether you have the infrastructure or not, this determines your ability to buy gas from somewhere or not to buy gas from somewhere. I have been dealing with this issue for more than 10 years now, and I can tell you that Russia has always been a reliable supplier of energy to Hungary, period. This is my experience.
Well, on the upside, the EU didn't really delete Russia's number, it's just blocked. But there are clearly some folks who would rather suffer and impose that suffering on everyone else than admit that maybe, just maybe, they were better off with their ex, or at least dating around.
Slovakia's prime minister will visit Moscow for Victory Day despite threats from the EU's foreign policy chief. Kaja Kallas warned member and candidate states against commemorating the defeat of Nazism in Russia, stating that repercussions could be faced.
What was also